You know, Leon Panetta, the CIA director and then Secretary of Defense, but when he was CIA director, said, you know, we're spending $110 billion a year chasing down 70 al-Qaeda members in Afghanistan. Ridiculous. And in order to sustain the level of expenditures and grow the military, industrial, intelligence, laboratory, financial complex, you got to have another enemy. And as terrible as the terrorism threat is, and it's real, it's nothing compared to what they could do, like in the movie Independence Day, where they stage an attack using man-made anti-gravs that look very ET, with this kind of technology, that there's a threat or an attack on Earth. So, heads up, Wernher von Braun, on his deathbed, warned that this would happen and it would be hoaxed. We've had so many people. I have met with one man, I can't get him to come forward, and then another, and then another, and then another, who spoke of, in the early days, they used, I know this sounds terrible, but he was a little guy, and he was so short, and they basically did like you would in a movie, suit and head and mat to make him look like an alien. And he would be, there would be military choppers nearby, but he would be on one of these flying discs, man-made, and go in and with a chemical canister and some electronics, abduct people. And he says, oh yeah, I was on an abduction squad, it was way back, I think in the 60s. They've gotten better, and I say better, and they've become more efficient because over the decades they've developed little creatures that look like an ET. They may look gray or like a reptile or this, and they kind of walk like this. They have this robotic, weird walk, and if you look at the, I saw the video that Stan Romanek had of the one that came into his house, that basically a film company bought up in Black Shelf. Nobody has seen this. I was at his home. And the one that came into his house was exactly one of these so-called gray-like creatures. And the way it moved was this very robotic. It was so obvious that it was a biomachine. And if you go into the brain, it is physical. It has a biological component, but it's laced, the neural cortex is laced with integrated circuits. And it's completely under control of these military operatives. But he thought it was an alien. I said, well, it was an alien, but not an ET. So I used the word alien, which has a very xenophobic ring, to connote the man-made ones, and the ETs are the ones that are interstellar. The aliens that are man-made are ones that are completely under the control of these paramilitary operations. And the stagecraft, if you use the language of this Strategic Studies Institute document, is so good that it would fool anyone. The president, the CIA, you could abduct, and they did. They abducted Paris de Cuellar out of his limousine using this stuff, and he thought it was ET. And that's why they killed the initial plan to end secrecy at the end of the Cold War. Gorbachev was on board, Reagan was on board, Paris de Cuellar, head of the UN, Prince of Liechtenstein was involved, et cetera, and so on. Killed it. Now we're getting, this I know is where everyone's going, can this man have lost his mind? Every word I'm telling you is true. This is the heart of the secrecy. How do you convince people there's another species to hate? Now, they actually took this from the playbook of Adolf Hitler. The way they conditioned the population. How'd you get a very, I mean, in the 20s and the early part of the 20th century, Germany was the apex of culture, erudition, progressivity, intellectual pursuits, et cetera, and so on. How do you get that population to devolve into this horrific community that could engage in the Holocaust and World War II, the way that happened? Psychological warfare. So the psychological warfare masters that were involved with the German attempt at Nazism got pulled into the OSS, thence that became the CIA, and they reside today within this unacknowledged, transnational, deep national security state. So that's exactly the problem we're facing. It isn't pretty. Yeah, I've tried to summarize it in these 3 or 4 hours as best as I can, but it's the truth. Now, as Gloria Steinem said, the truth will set you free, but first it might piss you off. And I think, a lot of people, when they learn that this is what they've been involved with, people who've done research on this subject, get quite irritated because they begin to realize that almost everything you know about the subject is not true about why they're here. Now, what I've learned is being head of the CE5, global CE5 effort. Let's go to the next one. It's a very interesting thing that came out not long ago. It's from the Daily Mail in the UK, but it was an article about this, this new electronic warfare system. And I actually talked about this 20-some years ago, but they're just now bringing it out, and it's kind of almost like Star Trek, but it's something you can put up that basically knocks out all electronic communication. You have the next one? And it just gives you the idea that if this is being reported in the regular media, or even tabloid media, this is at least 30 to 40 years old. This. And it's basically a platform that can float over an area and knock out all electronics. Not only in a city, but over a battlefield or what have you, using pulsed microwaves. Now, this is not talking about scalar. This is pulsed microwaves. But when you pulse microwaves in a certain way, it can cross over into this longitudinal effect, and it can have an enormously destructive result. And this was actually getting reported. So if this is being acknowledged in the media, it means that it's at least 5, 6, 7 generations old. So in other words, this is not state of the art. Anything that's acknowledged in the mainstream media is going to be old technology. And the really state-of-the-art stuff is highly classified, compartmented, and unacknowledged, most of the really amazing stuff. So this brings us to, how do we get out of this conundrum? And if you put up the next one. I just want to share this. I shared this in my London presentation last month, or in September. And this is the French initiative. And you see the date on it. This is by far, we're about to release all of this with a report on the internet, document ever generated by a government on this subject. Urgent, 16 January 2007. The French government had decided to reach out to us to make peaceful contact with the ETs and bypass this entire unacknowledged world of cloak and dagger nonsense. And so through a series of meetings that happened over 3 or 4 years, this Dr. Moran and his people, a very senior guy, an admiral and PhD scientist, also a medical doctor, with the Ministry of Defense. This is an official Ministry of Defense letter to me and a few other people about this project. And what they wanted to do was to have the protocols established. And with this document came an entire separate attachment that had all the research and equipment that would be needed to do a friendly diplomatic contact with these civilizations in France. And so we cooperated with that. This was something that was not talked about until September. And I referred to it some years ago. Those of you may remember, I talked about a major G7 country whose Ministry of Defense was reaching out to us to make peaceful contact. This is it. You know, I'm speaking of it now because that government left. It was Sarkozy, the President Sarkozy. And enough time has passed that I feel like I can talk about it without too many ruffled feathers. There's still going to be ruffled feathers with this. But importantly, what you have to look at with this document, and it's basically an explanation. If you look at the translation, we had expected to do an event sooner and it kept getting delayed. And the delay was because of, as it says, politics. And there were people interfering with this attempt to go out and have a team of folks with the air support, security support, and have, like in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, a contact, a landing, or a near contact event under the official auspices of the Ministry of Defense of France. Now, when we started going back and forth with this communication, of course, everything I do is monitored in real time. The French ambassador to the United States got a very nasty phone call from our intelligence community and saying, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And they really cussed him out. And he said, "Look, we're doing this, so we're a sovereign country." And basically what was said back to him was, don't do it anywhere near U.S. assets or U.S. airspace or U.S. territory, or you'll be in big trouble. And the French got very irritated by this. They said, we'll be completely within France and it's none of your business. So obviously there are elements within MAGIC in France who have run interference to interfere with this process. Every major country have elements. And so it's very political, it becomes very, very thorny, but the very fact that senior people in the Ministry of Defense of a major G7 country, group of 7, major economic country, would, and a nuclear power, would reach out to make peaceful contact using the close encounters of the Fifth Kind Initiative is by far the most historic thing. And that's why this document, I think, is the most important document ever written, because it's not classified. I only kept it private because I didn't want to burn bridges to the government that was there. And it did involve all the way up to the President of France, this effort. We actually ended up going, I believe it was in 2010 or 2011, and did a CE5 event that actually had enormous results. And their military had cordoned off the airspace, directed, and we had a 2,200-acre estate in Brittany. And there were ET craft tracked going overhead at over 200,000 kilometers an hour, and all kinds of strange phenomenon in the field where we were, which the admiral was there. Now, no one knew that's who he was. This ended up being a demonstration event for the Ministry of Defense people, and it was directed by me. And the cover story was that it was a CSETI expedition for a weekend. So if you sometimes come on these expeditions, there may be other folks there, huh? Get it? Nobody knew who he was. He was just a nice gentleman in a plaid shirt. But I mean, that's how these things have to happen. I mean, it wasn't my place to expose who he was. But they were very happy with the results and have learned a lot. And we're continuing to teach them about the concepts of non-locality and consciousness, remote viewing, coherent thought sequencing, electronic interface with thought that the ETs have, how to set up the correct philosophy and conditions for contact, on and on and on. And this is really the core of course, why I founded this organization, was to move us away from the brink of war into a time of interplanetary peace and universal peace. But at the same time, we have to understand that an operation like this isn't going on in a vacuum in outer space. It's going on within a world that's enormously dysfunctional, particularly with these national security issues and these sort of spy versus spy groups who interfere. And there was enormous interference between 2007 and 2010 trying to stop that process. And it continues to go on. I mean, it turns out there are people who are key involved with the liaison who are actually moles from MAGIC who are there to disrupt events. Infiltrators. So this is what happens. I mean, this is welcome to my life. But, that should be of no surprise to anyone, and it was certainly no surprise to me. But ultimately, the fact that there would be a major initiative like this from a government like France, for peaceful purposes as opposed to a warfare or militaristic purposes, is a very positive development. Because I had a lucid dream years ago, before I started these projects, and I'm part Cherokee and I have a lot of lucid dreams of the future, met my wife that way. And when we were in the future, and we were at White Sands, where the first atomic bomb went off. And there was a beautiful event happening. And the US Air Force and government had moved off this dime of either denial or suppression or hoaxing and trying to create this false flag World War III conflict that's completely a hoax. and had decided, yes, we need to pick this other path and make peaceful contact. And a massive government-sanctioned CE-5 was happening, broad daylight, and this beautiful silver seamless object descended in out of a blue sky, landed, and an ancient elder, ET, came out of it, and this was all broadcast live. The whole world saw it. Now, you know, maybe, I mean, that was before I founded CSETI and the Disclosure Project and all this, and I was maybe in my early 20s when I had that dream, and I'm 60 now. So, you know, it's a potential future, but I do believe it's a potential future. And the way it's going to become a real future is for all of us to do that. Because guess what? You know who the leaders are on this? You guys. Not the president, not the Congress. Disclosure, contact, all of that first has to be the people. We, the people. It's going to happen by us banding together, making contact, being enlightened about what we're doing, not going out there with ray guns, but doing it for the purpose of an open relationship that's peaceful and enduring between our planet and these other planets. That is the only possible outcome anyway. The other outcome, any conflict, I don't care with any ET civilization, would be the complete destruction of their planet and ours. It would be much worse than a massive global thermonuclear war exchange. So there is no possible future except a peaceful one. So let's figure out how to do that. No matter what your belief systems about these various civilizations that are out there, my own assessment is that some are not really thrilled with us because, well, who wouldn't be? And some are maybe our distant cousins. And some are just getting involved and looking with some horror at what's happening. But ultimately, none of them are overtly hostile. If they were, it'd be over. And let me tell you, it would have been over when we dropped the first atomic bomb. And I've been told that by multiple members of MAGIC, M-A-J-I-C, because they have said, yeah, of course. I mean, but it's very easy to play on people's paranoias and fears through mutilations and abductions. And this Dr. John Altshuler I mentioned, who is the nephew of Jimmy Doolittle, General Doolittle, he became the guy who did the first Snippy the horse case. You know Snippy the horse, the cattle mutilation and animal mutilation case? That was him. But he didn't get acknowledged because he wanted to stay in the background. But he was the scientist. I was staying at his home outside Denver, and he said, absolutely, that case was military, made to look ET for the purpose of scaring the hell out of people. I said, really? He says, absolutely. And then I met with a man, it was an accidental, you know, the universe works in strange ways. I'm sitting on a flight, flying, I think from Colorado or New Mexico to the East Coast, and the guy sitting beside me says, oh, I said, well, I'm a doctor. And he says, well, what are you doing out here? I said, well, I actually do stuff with UFOs. He says, oh, you're kidding. He says, let me tell you. And he owned a 250,000-acre ranch in northern New Mexico. And he said, let me tell you what they're doing to my cattle. And he said, but it's not alien, it's humans. And he had night scopes. He was a very wealthy man. And he said, these guys are coming in there with special silent helicopters, and we have them. My military advisor was on a ship where one landed in a fog, and they couldn't see it. They said, where is it, where is it? They said, look up, it's right above you, and there's no sound, completely quiet. He says, and we caught them red-handed doing these mutilations on my cattle. And he instituted a lawsuit against the U.S. government, but the group doing it was an unacknowledged group that's extra-constitutional, and the U.S. government said, we don't know anything about it. And the government people who said that were telling them the truth. See, this is real plausible deniability, right? Because they can honestly say, we don't know anything about this. So he took it all the way through the federal court system, it just got thrown out. Even though he had dispositive evidence, human, paramilitary, and U.S. military assets were doing it. And, you know, I've shared this with Linda Moot-Howell and others. You know, an alien harvest, I said, alien baloney. This is being done by people who want to scare the hell out of the public as part of this psychological warfare that was launched in 1953. But there's another reason for it. They're getting raw materials that they do take from that. It's hard to do it underground. Take them to underground bases, which become culture media for the programmed life forms, the man-made ETs I'm talking about. We don't have time to go into what these nanotechnological things are, but let me just say cloning. Dolly the sheep wasn't the first cloned creature. So with the right electromagnetic pulse, it's very easy to clone a human or an ET, or take tissue from one, but you need some kind of biological medium. And that's what the cattle mutilations provide, and the other animal mutilations provide the biological medium for these experiments in the development of man-made fake ETs. And by the way, there was an intelligence official who kept calling Stan Romanek, telling him when he had that creature come into his kitchen and said, Stan, it's one of the fake ones. And he didn't know what it meant. I went out there with a MUFON investigator who investigates abductions. I said, yeah, it's a fake one. And he says, what do you mean? I said, I've been talking about this for 20 years. The literature is replete with the military involvement in these abductions. It's a fake one. It's man-made. It's made to look alien, to scare the hell out of people, but because it puts fear out in the community. I said, it's not extraterrestrial. It's man-made. But the cattle mutilations do two things. They provide a nexus for more fear. Oh my God, not only are they abducting people, they're mutilating. But then it creates a source of biological substrate material for the nano biomachines that are these biologicals that look alien. And that was because they were taking them to Dulce, which was near his ranch. Same thing at Pine Gap. I have a science physicist who worked at Pine Gap in Australia, and it's all subterranean, and he worked on projects. He says, we have these creatures coming off like sausages on a conveyor belt. Absolutely. And I was at a meeting in Australia a couple years ago, and the Minister of Defense for Australia was there. He didn't know anything about this stuff. We had a very interesting conversation. But I said, no, you wouldn't. I said, our Secretary of Defense doesn't know about this either. But that is really what's happening. So you have to think that, well, if we can make our way through this nexus of fear and false information that has kind of colonized everyone's mind, then we can go out there with Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind teams and make peaceful contact with these civilizations. How beautiful. And that's why I tell people, don't be afraid of anything interstellar. You should be very concerned about paramilitary human. But the interstellars, not a problem. And I think you have to make a distinction. People say, well, how do you tell the difference? Well, an ET craft has no seams. The light from it is coming from refined materials that are so pure that the light itself looks like celestial. The beings themselves have a completely non-invasive, very intelligent, I mean, IQ of 400, 500, that range, and very conscious and spiritual. The PLFs are menacing, they're invasive. The man-made Lockheed Martin, Northrop, SAIC, man-made discs, saucers, triangles have rivets and seams. It's quite clear to tell the difference, but you need to know there is a difference first, because otherwise you're going to think everything is alien, and it's not. And that's why I'm doing this webinar with thousands of people watching. It's going to go up on the web. Is that the public needs to know the difference between the real and the false, and what the agenda is for the false one, and how easy it is, whether it's through a cosmic 9/11 or some other scenario, to manipulate the public into fear and get on a war footing where we then suspend our liberties, our freedoms, and spend trillions of dollars and countless lives in a concocted, hoaxed battle. Don't be fooled again. We need to not be fooled again. And this is the big one that we need to wake up to. If enough of us wake up to this and then go out and make peaceful contact, then those folks who want to see us create a time of endless war can't have their way. They only succeed if you are sheeple, who are going to follow along with the conventional wisdom like zombies half asleep. So I beg you to share this with everyone you know, and go out there and make peaceful contact. The other thing I'm calling for is this Whistleblower Act provision. If there are people in this audience or who know people who have been involved in these projects who can testify, and if there's an attorney team that will take it, we will initiate this lawsuit. And the next is mass defections. All of you know people who know people who know people. It's 2 or 3 degrees of separation. If you work your network, those of you listening who are in California in the high desert, there are people in Palmdale near Edwards, there are people in Nevada listening right now. You network in your community and you find people who are at these facilities that I named. And unfortunately that document didn't make it, but listen to it. And if they've worked on these projects related to ETs, UFOs, PLFs, program life forms, anti-grav, you may defect with impunity under the National Security Act of the United States. Why? Because we have proven today that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of officials in the US government, in the British government, and every other country who have been denied access through a criminal enterprise, a racketeering influence corrupt organization, the largest RICO in the world, that has involved itself in corruption, and therefore it cannot, if it is violating the US, British, and other constitutions, cite the National Security Act to provide cover. That is why on 2001, on May 9th, when we did the Disclosure Project, and I had 20-some people at the National Press Club over here, and then subsequently more than 100 that came forward in the book and videos for disclosure, none of them, even though they had top secret clearances on this issue, none of them ever got a phone call or a letter saying, be quiet. Because we had proven between 1992 and 2001 that this is an illegal, unconstitutional operation. So anyone listening who has a family member, a friend, a neighbor, someone you can network who's been in those projects or are currently in those projects, contact me at our website, Sirius Disclosure, SIRIUS disclosure.com. We will treat you with the greatest confidentiality. Now, we do not want to hear from secondhand people unless you have dispositive documents and proof. Only firsthand, people who are there and who can prove they're there.